Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm not the kind of guy who ignores environmental responsibility. When the drought got serious, I followed the rules. I cut back on watering, installed a drip irrigation system, and even replaced some of our grass with drought-resistant plants. But despite my best efforts, brown patches started appearing across our front lawn. It wasn't pretty, but it was the reality of living in a drought-stricken state. That's when Karen showed up. Karen is the president of our HOA board, and she takes that title very seriously. She's the type of woman who measures grass height with a ruler and counts how many seconds your sprinklers run. She drives around the neighborhood in her white car every morning at exactly 8 o'clock looking for violations like she's on some kind of mission from God. Last Tuesday, I came home from work to find an official-looking letter taped to my front door. The letterhead read, Sunset Meadows Homeowners Association, violation notice in big red letters. My stomach dropped. The letter was signed by Karen and said that my front yard was in violation of the community standards due to unsightly brown patches and poor lawn maintenance. I had 30 days to restore my lawn to acceptable green condition or face escalating fines starting at $200. I was furious. Here I was, trying to be a responsible citizen by conserving water during a state-mandated drought, and they wanted to fine me for it. I decided to call Karen directly. I called her up and told her I was a neighbor from Oak Street who got the violation notice. I explained that I needed to discuss it with her. She remembered my property right away and said the lawn was absolutely unacceptable. She claimed the brown spots were bringing down everyone's property values. I told her I understood her concern but explained that I was following state water restrictions because we were in the middle of a serious drought. Karen said she didn't care about drought restrictions. She insisted that our community standards clearly said that lawns must be maintained in good condition and that green lawns were part of what made this neighborhood desirable. I pointed out that state law required us to conserve water and that I couldn't water enough to keep it completely green without violating those restrictions. Karen told me that was my problem to figure out. She said maybe I should have thought about that before buying in a community with standards. This woman was telling me to break state law to satisfy her aesthetic preferences. I hung up and immediately started doing research. It turns out California has some pretty clear laws about this exact situation. The state's Water Conservation Act specifically protects homeowners from HOA penalties when they're complying with drought restrictions. Any HOA rule that conflicts with state water conservation laws is automatically void. Armed with this knowledge, I printed out copies of the relevant statutes and drove over to Karen's house. She answered the door wearing a perfectly pressed blouse and a scowl. I told her I wanted to discuss the violation notice with her in person. She said there was nothing to discuss and that I needed to fix my lawn or pay the fines. I explained that there was something to discuss because I'd done some research, and what she was asking me to do violated state law. I handed her the printed pages explaining the water conservation protections. Karen said she didn't care what some website said and that our HOA rules were binding. I corrected her, explaining that this wasn't from a website, but from the California Water Code, Section 22.5. I told her it explicitly said that HOAs cannot penalize homeowners for complying with water conservation measures. Karen barely looked at the papers before handing them back. She claimed that their attorney said they could enforce their community standards regardless of these so-called drought rules. She insisted that my lawn was ugly and would stay ugly until I fixed it. I warned her that her attorney was wrong, and that if she proceeded with these fines, I'd be filing a complaint with the state and potentially taking legal action. Karen told me to go ahead and try. She bragged that they'd been running this community for 15 years and knew what they were doing. That conversation convinced me that Karen wasn't going to back down voluntarily. She was too invested in her power trip to admit she was wrong, so I decided to take the next step. I contacted the California Department of Water Resources and filed a formal complaint. I also reached out to a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes. Turns out cases like mine are more common than you'd think, and the state takes these violations seriously. Within a week, I received a letter from the Department of Water Resources saying that they were opening an investigation into my HOA's practices. The letter also included a cease and desist order requiring the HOA to stop any enforcement actions related to drought-compliant landscaping. I made copies of this letter and hand-delivered one to Karen's house. This time, when she opened the door, her confident smirk was gone. Karen asked what the letter was supposed to be. I explained it was an official cease and desist order from the state and that she was legally required to stop pursuing these fines. Karen said it was ridiculous and that she was calling their attorney right away. I told her that was her right, but mentioned that violating a state cease and desist order came with penalties up to $10,000 per violation. Her face went pale. For the first time since this whole thing started, Karen looked genuinely worried. 3 days later, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney saying that my violation notice was being rescinded due to updated interpretation of community standards in light of state regulations. No apology, of course, but I didn't expect one. 2 weeks later, I was working in my garage when my neighbor from across the street came over. He asked if I'd heard about Karen. When I said no, he told me the state had hit the HOA with a $15,000 fine for violating water conservation laws. He explained that my case had opened up an investigation into all their recent lawn violations, and they'd found a pattern of illegal enforcement. I asked if he was serious, and he said it got even better. He told me Karen had gotten voted off the HOA board at the emergency meeting the night before. A lot of people were tired of her power trips, and this was the last straw. After my divorce, I fought hard to get sole custody of my 2 kids. My ex and his family live about 9 hours away, which works perfectly for me. The distance means I don't have to deal with their drama on a daily basis, and my kids and I have built a peaceful life together in our little apartment. The whole mess started because I made one stupid mistake. A few months earlier, my ex's mom had asked if she could mail some gifts for the kids. She wanted to stay involved in their lives, so I gave her my address. Big mistake. It was a Tuesday morning around 9 a.m. when I first heard the tapping. I was still in my pajamas, having my coffee and enjoying the quiet before the kids woke up. At first, I thought maybe it was a tree branch hitting the window, but the tapping was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I crept over to my bedroom window and peeked through the bottom of the blinds. All I could see were women's sneakers. My heart started racing because who stands outside someone's bedroom window at 9 in the morning? I lifted the blinds a little higher and made direct eye contact with my ex's mom. My first thought was, what the hell? Followed quickly by, how did she even get here? My apartment complex isn't gated, so anyone can drive onto the property, but you need a key to get into the actual buildings. That's why she was tipping on my window instead of knocking on my front door like a normal person. Once she saw me, there was no pretending I wasn't home. I threw on some clothes and went outside to see what she wanted. She cheerfully told me she was in the neighborhood and thought she'd stop by to see the kids. I asked her how she could be in the neighborhood when she lived 9 hours away and why she didn't call first. She brushed off my questions and said it was a last-minute decision. Then she asked if the kids were awake because she brought them some toys. I felt trapped. She'd driven all that way, and the kids would be happy to see their grandmother. So I let her in and she spent about an hour with them before leaving. But when she was walking out, I made something very clear. I told her that while I appreciated her wanting to see the kids, she needed to give me a heads up next time. I explained that I wasn't talking about 10 minutes before she showed up, but that I needed at least a week's notice. She complained that a week seemed excessive, but I told her it wasn't negotiable. I reminded her that this was my home and these were my children, so I needed advance notice. She didn't seem happy about it, but she nodded and left. 4 months later, I heard that same familiar tapping on my bedroom window. This time, I didn't even bother looking. I knew exactly who it was, and I was furious. She was pulling the same stunt again, completely ignoring what I told her. My phone started ringing. First call, second call, third call. I let them all go to voicemail. On the fifth call, I finally answered. She demanded that I open the door because she wanted to see the kids. I told her I wasn't even home right now. She accused me of lying and said she knew I was in there. I explained that I was 45 minutes away visiting my dad with the kids and asked again why she didn't tell me she was coming. She demanded my dad's address so she could come there instead. I refused to give her the address. I reminded her that I had told her before that she needed to call ahead and said I had no idea when I'd be home. She kept insisting it was a last-minute decision and that I should just let her see her grandchildren. I hung up on her. Within minutes, my phone was blowing up with texts from my ex, demanding that I let his mom see the kids. I texted back the same thing I told her, I wasn't home. Then came the loud banging on my door. But it wasn't the same tapping from before. This was aggressive, official sounding. My blood ran cold when I heard someone shout that it was the police. I didn't answer the door. Instead, my phone rang from an unknown number. The officer introduced himself and said he was outside my apartment to perform a wellness check. He explained that my ex-mother-in-law had called and said she hasn't heard from me in 3 days and was extremely worried about me and the children. I told him that was a complete lie. I explained that I had just spoken to her on the phone 20 minutes ago and that she had showed up at my apartment unannounced, which I had specifically asked her not to do. The officer told me I needed to answer the door because it was illegal not to respond when police were knocking. I explained that I wasn't even home and was visiting family with my kids about 45 minutes away. I told him she was lying because she was upset that I wouldn't let her see the kids without any notice. When he asked if I could prove I wasn't home, I got angry. I told him I didn't have to prove anything to him. I explained that she had no legal right to see my children, that I had sole custody, and that she had shown up unannounced after I specifically told her not to. I said she was now wasting police resources because she didn't get her way. There was a long pause before he said he understood my position and that they would note that contact was made and that me and the children were safe. After he hung up, my phone immediately started buzzing with angry texts from my ex. He called me an a-hole and asked how hard it would have been to let his mom see the kids when she drove 9 hours just to see them. I texted back that she drove 9 hours without calling first, after I explicitly told her not to do that. I said I didn't care how far she drove because it was my house and my rules. He said I was being unreasonable and reminded me she was their grandmother. I replied that I was their mother with sole custody, and she didn't get to show up whenever she wanted and expect me to drop everything. The texts kept coming for hours. He called me controlling, vindictive, and every name in the book, but I didn't care. I was done being manipulated. What really got to me was that she had lied to the police. She told them she hadn't heard from me in 3 days when we'd literally just gotten off the phone. She knew exactly where I was and that the kids were safe, but she called the cops anyway because she thought it would force me to comply. The next day, I decided to take action. I called the police station and asked to file a report about the false wellness check. I explained the whole situation to the desk sergeant, including the lie about not hearing from me in 3 days. The sergeant told me that filing a false police report was a serious offense and asked if I was sure I wanted to pursue it. I said absolutely, explaining that she had wasted their officers' time and resources because she didn't get her way, and that wasn't okay. 2 weeks later, Karen received a citation for filing a false police report. My ex called me screaming about how I'd gotten his mother in trouble with the law over something so petty. But I didn't feel bad at all. She had crossed the line and there needed to be results. She never showed up unannounced again. I started working for the airline right after college. My degree was in hospitality management, but the travel benefits and decent pay drew me to aviation. Plus, I genuinely enjoy helping people and making their flights comfortable. Most passengers are reasonable, even when things go wrong. Most passengers. I was doing my usual pre-flight checks when I noticed this woman in seat 12B with her kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old. The kid was bouncing around, pressing the call button repeatedly, and generally being disruptive. The woman wasn't doing anything to control him. I walked over with my professional smile and asked if there was anything I could help them with. The woman finally looked up and told me that someone with authority had finally arrived. She explained that her son was fascinated by airplanes and wanted to see the cockpit. The kid was literally climbing over the seat now, bothering the passenger behind him. I apologized but explained that passengers weren't allowed in the cockpit for security reasons. I offered to get him some wing spin or maybe arrange for him to meet the pilot after we landed. Karen immediately dismissed my explanation as ridiculous. She argued that he was just a child and asked what he could possibly do to crash the plane. I tried to stay patient and explained that I understood her son was interested in aviation, but federal regulations were very strict about cockpit access with no exceptions. She accused me of discrimination and claimed I was denying her child an educational opportunity. I tried to stay calm and explain again, but she wasn't having it. The kid started crying because he heard the word no, which made Karen even angrier. She told me to look at her carefully and reminded me that she had paid good money for these tickets. She demanded that the least I could do was let her son see where the pilot sits. I wished I could help but explained it wasn't my rule but federal aviation law. I told her that even if I wanted to allow it, I literally could not let anyone unauthorized into the cockpit. She then demanded I get someone who could authorize it and asked for my manager. I called over my senior colleague, hoping she might have better luck explaining the situation. My senior colleague asked if there was a problem. Karen immediately said there was a big problem and complained that I was being completely unreasonable. She explained that her son just wanted to see the cockpit for 2 minutes and asked if that was too much to ask. The senior flight attendant apologized but explained that cockpit access was restricted by federal law and wasn't something we could change even if we wanted to. Karen dismissed this as bureaucratic nonsense and insisted she knew we could make exceptions. The plane was supposed to take off in 20 minutes, and other passengers were starting to stare. Karen's voice kept getting louder. She announced that she was done asking permission and declared that her son was going to see that cockpit whether we liked it or not. Before anyone could react, she grabbed her kid's hand and started walking toward the front of the plane. I quickly stepped in front of her and told her she needed to return to her seat immediately because we were preparing for takeoff. She yelled at me to get out of her way and actually shoved me hard. I stumbled backward into the galley cart. I told her she had just physically assaulted a crew member and needed to calm down and return to her seat, or we would have to involve security. She claimed assault was too strong a word since she had barely touched me and accused me of being dramatic. But she didn't stop there. She turned back toward the cockpit, dragging her confused son behind her. When I moved to block her path again, she swung her purse at me. She screamed that her son was going to fly this plane and insisted he was going to be a pilot when he grew up, claiming this was educational. I told her that her son could not and would not be flying anything that day and ordered her to return to her seat. That's when she completely lost it. She started screaming about her rights, about discrimination, about how we were ruining her child's dreams. Then she lunged at me again, this time with her fingernails out. The senior flight attendant immediately called the captain while I radioed for airport security. Karen was still yelling and trying to push past me when 2 air marshals appeared. Turns out they'd been watching the whole thing unfold. The air marshal told her she needed to come with them. She refused to go anywhere and claimed this was harassment while demanding to speak to their supervisor. The marshal explained that she had physically assaulted a crew member and attempted to breach cockpit security, telling her she was under arrest. She asked incredulously what she was being arrested for, claiming she was just trying to give her child a learning experience. They started putting handcuffs on her while she continued screaming. The poor kid was crying hysterically now, not understanding why his mom was being arrested. She kept yelling that this was insane and threatened to sue the airline and all of us. She boasted that her husband was a lawyer. When they escorted her off the plane, she kept yelling threats and demands. The other passengers actually started clapping when she was finally removed. Her son was taken by social services until family could be contacted. We delayed takeoff by 40 minutes while police took statements and cleared the scene. The captain made an announcement explaining there had been a security incident but that everything was resolved. Later, I found out Karen was charged with assault, interfering with flight crew duties, and attempting to breach cockpit security. The kid ended up living with his grandmother. My older sister chased dreams of living in some rural paradise while I stayed in the city, built my career in marketing, and made peace with my decision to never have kids. It wasn't that I hated children, I just knew that lifestyle wasn't for me. I liked my freedom, my sleep, and my disposable income. My sister wanted the whole package: husband, house with a big yard, and babies. She got married right after college and moved to this tiny town about an hour outside the nearest city. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, there's one grocery store, and the closest Starbucks is a 40-minute drive. She loved it, said it was peaceful and perfect for raising a family. When she had her first baby 2 years ago, reality hit her hard. Living in the middle of nowhere has its downsides when you need reliable childcare. She'd been working as a freelance, but with a newborn, she could barely manage to shower, let alone meet client deadlines. She started calling me weekly with the same complaints about how impossible it was to find good childcare in her area. The few options available were either too expensive, too far away, or had waiting lists longer than her pregnancy. I listened and tried to be supportive, even though I could see this coming from a mile away when she chose to live in such an isolated place. During one of our calls, she complained about finding a woman who seemed perfect but wanted $15 an hour for full-time care. I told her that didn't sound unreasonable for professional childcare. She went on about how that was $600 a week and how she couldn't afford that since she was barely making any money with freelancing. I tried to be understanding, I really did. She was struggling, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. But then she started getting into this mindset that somehow she was entitled to cheap labor just because she lived in a small town. She explained how these people didn't understand that cost of living was different in her area, claiming that $15 an hour there was like making $25 an hour in the city. I pointed out that they still had bills to pay and that gas and food costs were probably similar everywhere. She agreed but said she thought they were being unrealistic. Then she made a comment that really got to me. She said they'd basically be playing with a baby all day and wondered how hard it could be. That comment made me bite my tongue. I wanted to remind her how she'd been complaining about how exhausting taking care of one baby was, but I figured it wasn't worth starting an argument. For weeks, she kept calling with updates about her childcare search. She told me about finding someone willing to work for $12 an hour who lived too far away, and another person who wanted $10 an hour but could only work part-time. She was getting frustrated that no one would accept what she considered a fair wage. In another call, she complained about how babysitters back when we were kids made like $3 an hour. I reminded her that was 20 years ago, and babysitting for a few hours was different from full-time childcare. She still insisted that these people were asking for more than minimum wage. So I explained that they were professionals providing a valuable service and that she was asking them to care for her most precious thing in the world. The conversation that really got to me happened on a particularly bad day for her. The baby had been fussy, she'd missed a client deadline, and her husband was working overtime. She called me in tears, saying she couldn't do this anymore and needed help, but everyone wanted so much money. She needed someone for 40 hours a week, but couldn't pay them enough to live on. I felt bad for her, I really did. But I also couldn't ignore how wrong her logic was. I told her I understood childcare was expensive, but she had to think about it from the caregiver's perspective too. If someone was working 40 hours a week, they needed to make enough money to support themselves. She said that just wasn't realistic for her budget right now. I suggested she could look into daycare centers instead of private nannies, but she explained the closest one was 30 minutes away with a waiting list. We went in circles like this for a while. I was trying to be supportive without validating her belief that people should work full-time for poverty wages. It was a delicate balance, and honestly, I was getting tired of having the same conversation every week. Then she said something that completely changed the tone of our relationship. She told me she could probably move me from my state for less money than she'd pay a nanny to take care of her son. I actually laughed out loud. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh. I told her no, she couldn't. She asked what I meant, explaining that I didn't have kids and worked remotely sometimes, so I could just live there and help her out. She said she'd pay me something, obviously. The audacity was breathtaking. She was essentially suggesting I uproot my entire life, move to the middle of nowhere, and become her live-in nanny for whatever pocket change she thought was appropriate. I asked her to clarify. Did she want me to leave my apartment, my job, my friends, my entire life, to move to her tiny town and take care of her baby? She said when I put it like that, it sounded bad. But I should think about it because I'd save money on rent, and the cost of living was so much lower there. I asked about my career, my social life, my independence. She said I could still do my marketing work and that I'd have family there. I could hear her getting excited about this idea like she'd solved all her problems. Meanwhile, I was sitting there stunned by how little she seemed to value my life and choices. She added that I'd said I might want to slow down someday, claiming this could be perfect. I had to explain that when I said I might want to slow down, I meant when I'm older and have saved enough money to retire comfortably, not move to the middle of nowhere to be her underpaid childcare. She insisted I wouldn't be underpaid because she'd give me free housing and food, plus some spending money. The more she talked, the more entitled she sounded. It was like she couldn't understand that I had my own life and priorities. I asked her to confirm she expected me to work full-time, which she had established was a 40-hour-a-week job, in exchange for room and board and some spending money. She said it wasn't like that because I'd be helping family. I pointed out that she'd be getting full-time childcare for basically nothing while I gave up everything I'd worked for. She started sputtering, trying to come up with arguments for why this was a reasonable request. She said that since I didn't even want kids, at least this way I could experience what it was like without the permanent commitment. I was done being polite. I told her I didn't want kids, which meant I definitely didn't want to take care of hers for 40 hours a week. I explained that the fact that she thought I should give up my career and independence to solve her childcare problem showed how little she understood about my life or respected my choices. She said she just thought that since I didn't have kids of my own, maybe I'd be interested. I made it clear that no, I wouldn't be happy to dedicate my life to raising hers. The conversation went quiet for a long moment. I could hear her realizing that her brilliant solution wasn't going to work. She admitted she guessed she didn't think about it from my perspective. I told her no, she didn't. And I added that, honestly, the fact that she thought someone should work full-time for room and board, whether it was me or a professional nanny, was pretty entitled. After that call, she stopped bringing up the childcare issue with me. A few months later, she mentioned that she'd found someone, a retired teacher who was willing to work part-time for a reasonable wage, which meant my sister had to adjust her work schedule but made things work financially. Our old supervisor was great. She trusted us to do our jobs and didn't micromanage every little thing. When she got promoted to district manager last month, we were all happy for her but worried about who would replace her. We found out soon enough, and our fears were completely justified. Enter Karen. She really was everything you'd expect from someone with that name. She'd been working alongside us as a regular agent for about 2 years, but she was never particularly good at the job. Her call resolution times were always high, she struggled with the more complex cases, and most of us had to help her out regularly. But she had one thing going for her that the rest of us didn't. She was buddies with our boss. Our boss is this middle-aged divorced guy who's always dating different women and apparently can't figure out his love life. Karen somehow became his unofficial relationship counselor. She'd spend her lunch breaks giving him advice about which dating apps to use, how to text women, what to wear on dates. It was pretty cringe to watch, but hey, to each their own, right? When the supervisor position opened up, guess who got promoted? Not the guy who'd been there for 5 years and knew the systems inside and out. Not the woman who consistently had the highest customer satisfaction scores. Nope, Karen got the job because she and the boss were tight. From day one, Karen made it clear she was going to change things. She called it bringing fresh leadership and implementing new standards of accountability. The rest of us called it what it was, a power trip. We had this Teams chat that we used to communicate throughout the day. It was nothing fancy, just a way to keep everyone updated and ask for help when needed. The system was simple and worked perfectly. If you needed to step away from your desk for any reason, you'd just type BRB in the chat so everyone knew you weren't available to take overflow calls from other agents. We'd been doing this for years without any problems. But apparently, Karen had bigger plans. About 2 weeks into her reign of terror, she started calling each of us into one-on-one meetings. When my turn came, I figured it would be some standard new supervisor introduction thing. She told me she wanted to discuss our communication protocols. When I asked what about them, she explained that she'd been reviewing how we used the Teams chat and thought we needed more transparency. I asked her what kind of transparency she meant. She said that when people typed BRB, she had no idea what they were doing or how long they'd be gone. As a supervisor, she claimed she needed to know where her team was at all times. I pointed out that the system worked fine and that people usually gave time estimates if they'd be gone longer than a few minutes. She insisted that wasn't good enough anymore. From now on, she wanted everyone to be specific about why they were stepping away and for how long. When I asked her to clarify what she meant by specific, she told me to just explain what I was doing. Going to the bathroom, getting coffee, whatever. She said she needed full transparency to manage the team effectively. I stared at her for a moment, thinking she had to be joking. I told her I wasn't comfortable announcing to the entire team every time I needed to use the bathroom. She just shrugged and said it was about being transparent, and since everyone would be doing it, it wouldn't single anyone out. When I repeated that I really wasn't comfortable sharing that kind of personal information with everyone, she shrugged again, like my comfort didn't matter at all. She said it was a new rule and that we needed transparency so she could know what everyone was doing at all times. She claimed it was about accountability and professional standards. I left that meeting feeling pretty annoyed, but what could I do? Karen was the supervisor now, and apparently this was the hill she wanted to die on. I figured I'd just deal with it and keep things as vague as possible. But the more I thought about it, the more irritated I got. We're all adults here. We've been doing this job successfully for years. The idea that we suddenly needed to report our bathroom breaks like elementary school kids was insulting. And the whole transparency thing was clearly just Karen trying to flex her new authority. So the next day when nature called, I decided to follow her instructions to the letter. Instead of typing my usual BRB, I wrote BRB. Going to go poop in the bathroom? The response was immediate. My private message notification dinged almost instantly. Karen messaged me saying that language was completely unprofessional and inappropriate for workplace communication. I replied that she'd told me to be specific about what I was doing, and I was just following her instructions. She insisted that wasn't what she meant. I told her that actually I didn't know that, since she'd said she needed transparency about what we were doing when we stepped away, so I was being transparent. She demanded I use more professional language. I asked if defecate would be professional enough. She didn't respond to that message. But here's the thing about call center workers. We're a tight-knit group. We have to be, because we deal with angry customers all day and management that doesn't always understand what we're going through. When one of us is dealing with something ridiculous, word spreads fast. By the end of that day, everyone knew about Karen's new rule and my response to it. And let me tell you, my co-workers did not disappoint. The next morning, the messages started rolling in. Someone announced they were going to stand in front of the urinal and do an impression of a water fountain. Another person said they needed to blow their nose to try to dislodge a giant booger. One co-worker mentioned needing to adjust their underwear because it was riding up. Someone else said they were going to scratch an itch in a place they couldn't scratch at their desk. Karen was furious. She started private messaging people left and right, telling them to keep it professional, but nobody was technically breaking any rules. She'd asked for specific information about what we were doing, and that's exactly what she was getting. My personal favorite came from this older guy. who'd been there longer than anyone. He announced he was going to sit on the porcelain throne and contemplate the meaning of life while his digestive system processed yesterday's questionable cafeteria meatloaf. Even some of the more reserved team members got in on it. One person said they were going to participate in the biological function of waste elimination. Another announced they were visiting the facilities to engage in the expulsion of bodily fluids. The team's chat became absolutely chaotic. Karen kept trying to rein everyone in, but what could she say? She was the one who demanded transparency and specificity. We were just giving her exactly what she asked for. Within a week, Karen was clearly at her breaking point. She called another round of one-on-one meetings. She told me that the communication in our team's chat had gotten out of hand. I asked her how so, pointing out that everyone was being very transparent about what they were doing, just like she'd requested. She said I knew exactly what she meant, and that the language being used was inappropriate. I reminded her that it was specific and transparent, which was what she'd wanted. She admitted that maybe we could dial back the specificity when people stepped away from their desks. I asked if that meant we didn't need to be so detailed anymore. She said no, we should just go back to saying BRB or something simple. I asked if she was sure because I wanted to make sure I was following her communication protocols correctly. She looked like she wanted to strangle me, but what could she do? She'd created this mess herself. She confirmed that yes, we should just keep it simple and professional. She still tries to micromanage everything we do, just in different ways now, but at least we don't have to announce our bathroom breaks anymore. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.